Uh, a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for your time today. And today is an interesting webinar topic we picked up at Upshot, and we want to drive it with a wise man who has been there, done that, and can advise us on the best practices and so on and so forth. So, this particular webinar we are primarily doing to help a lot of people out there who are primarily doing various roles in product development activity or marketing activity. So we will try answering as many questions as possible during the course of the deck. So be patient, hear us out, and then maybe you can ask us the questions in the last. And for those of you who would love to see it again or get the file of the deck that we are using today, feel free to write to us, or in other ways, and we will anyway send you a link for the overall recording, which you can watch it at your own convenience. So today I will be playing the role of a host and the moderator for this particular discussion. And I don't want to run this like a regular webinar where we just keep on talking. And just to give us the benefit of taking as much as possible from Ashutosh wisdom, and given his limited time, thank you so much, Ashutosh, for joining us today in spite of your busy schedule. So, team of Ashutosh comes with a very rich experience in the startup world, especially from the product management side of it, where he's been associated with this domain for the last 15 plus years, playing various roles in the product management activity at multinationals, and also being a startup founder by himself. He has started up two companies, and today he is currently owning the entire product strategy for MoneyTap at Freo. A very warm welcome for you, Ashutosh. Thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Arun. Pleasure to be here.
So Ashutosh, today for this discussion, I want to be playing my audience role or our audience role. So I have some quick questions just to, put a thought on what was the confusion in the market and things like that. So just bear with me. I'll just take like a couple of minutes. I'll ask you a couple of questions, and then you can, show us how it is done or how you typically prefer to do it. Yeah. So when we look at onboarding, which is pretty close to my heart because we at Upshot has been associated with multiple companies working out on multiple applications targeted towards multiple use cases or different customer segments. So we have all sorts of people talking about different definitions when it comes to onboarding, and especially when we are looking at developing a product from grounds up. So the quick question or the quick comment that we hear is an onboarding is the shortest possible customer journey from learning aspect, which can make the customer understand about your product and then quickly engage with it. And that is how the objective will be defined, and then the product development teams get on with it when it comes to UI and UX. And there is this other definition that I also see is people will say that onboarding is such customer journey which typically gets the customer adopt the product and then be there to just push the customer make that very first transaction. So the maybe underlying fact is once a user is able to do a transaction, we assume that he has understood the product and then stuff like that. But my current question, which I want you to even answer in the next subsequent slides is maybe because we have users who are registering for this webinar has an app or has one idea, but the classic case that we are currently looking at is because we are not in 2008 or 2009 timelines, right, where there are not many applications or everybody just in the first phase of app development and then they just launched it. We are in a very matured state of activities, and then you always have an app where you just launched or you have users who just got onboarded, and then you have applications on which users are already onboarded and they're using it. There is a churn, there is a growth and stuff like that. And there is the much further power user stage where you have loyal customers and stuff like that who doesn't need to be spoon fed. They know much about it. But the $1,000,000 question that we're seeing is, when it comes to onboarding, the previous definitions no longer hold good, right? When it comes to various phases of application.
So Arun, what I would say is that even if I look at this slide, right? So while the product could have moved through these phases, that initially you launch the product, then it reaches an intermediate stage, and then it reaches a stage where there are a lot of power users. But if you think of it from a user perspective, this is always changing in the sense that
Exactly.
even if it's an evolved product right now, there would still be people who are using it or getting aware about it for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who are intermediate stage. So it's like it's never done, right? Onboarding is never finished at some level because your things change, right? So maybe you first launched in one market, then you're going to other markets, or first you were going after a particular set of users, then it becomes much more broad based. So to give you an example, right, initially if you look at Instagram, the core
Mm-hmm.
user base was people who loved photography, were good photographers.
Mm-hmm.
So they would come onto the platform, they would upload their photos, and it was a curated platform for maybe just a very small subset of the population.
Perfect.
But
Yeah.
over a period of time, it's become very, very different, right? So like almost everyone uses it right now.
Exactly.
So so things change, right? The product also evolves. So it's not that the same product becomes like a mature product. There are a lot of changes which keep on happening. But
Right.
even now, say Instagram is going after growth in a new market.
Mm-hmm.
Say I'm just making it up, but say they're launching in a new market where they don't have much presence at the moment. They would
Mm-hmm.
still have to think through what is going to be the experience for the new user who's getting exposed to it at this point of time, right? So there's a huge scope of customizing this based on various parameters. Like in a country like India, if you have a product in different languages, so if you have it in English, you're probably going after a particular audience. Once you go vernacular, you're going after a different audience.
Of
So
course.
this is a always ongoing process, right? So it's like there's no app which is in a mature phase at some level because there are still new users who are coming into the platform. So from an onboarding perspective, most important is the person who's getting exposed to this for the first time, or trying to use it for the first time, because that's how you will drive retention and everything else.
Right.
Because
Right.
in this era, what will happen is that there are a lot of users who became aware about this product from friends or someone else, right?
Right.
So they already know what the product does, they already know everything, so they are just coming in and they want to start using it. So maybe the onboarding piece is still important, but maybe not that critical for this person as compared to someone who is coming there for the first time, does not know much about the product, and is discovering everything through that journey. So somewhere,
So you would say
there's a
that's a
big,
continuous process that we
yeah,
need to look at when it
yeah,
comes.
and we start focusing on power users, but I think power users don't really need onboarding. It's the new user who's not had much awareness about the product,
Got it.
who needs this. So yeah, it's an evolving process. So
So this is
uh,
one thing that I want you to touch upon in
okay,
your, wisdom part, where we are looking
sure,
at how, from a practitioner's perspective, how should a product guy look at it, and how should a marketing guy typically looks at it? Because you've been delivering guest lectures at various IM institutions, so you want to learn from it. And second thing, see, when it comes to this, is a practical scenario where majority of the product management guys or the digital marketing guys might have challenges which
yeah,
they are here to learn from us. And then when it comes to a typical key challenges, right, because ideally when we are designing the product from the concept to the design to the deployment, we always have certain things, maybe myths or certain biases that we have
hmm,
from cognitive standpoint, that maybe this is obvious, but most often we will be proved by the user that maybe that is obvious to us but not for them. So there again, the key challenges that a typical digital marketer might have it with his communicating with the user would be attention span, whatever he
yeah,
designs, whatever messaging he has to put in. So that is one challenge that we want to understand how you guys are handling it. Being a 10 million downloaded application, we want to get some information there. And then, see, all of us doesn't have great products, right? But
yeah.
the professionals in this field were given products either by developing from scratch or taking care of it in the middle and then making them great by themselves by applying various strategies. So we want to know what else are the kind of strategies. And then, see, these days we see this monetizing, right? Monetary
Yeah.
incentivizing, first time download, discount coupons, and all. This is not a lasting solution. So technically, and not all companies has a lot of backing of VC funds and stuff like that. So that is something we want to actually, not
So
asking.
Arun, just one point here, right?
Mhm.
No matter how great the onboarding, if the product is not solving a real issue for users or not giving them some real benefit,
Of course.
I mean, the best of onboarding is going to fail, right? So, be it monetary incentives for first time users or any kind of onboarding experience you build in,
Hmm.
the whole idea is that you have, when you're looking at optimizing onboarding, you have reached some kind of product market fit. Your product is loved by some category of users,
Of course.
and now you're trying to fasten the adoption and get more people aware about it.
Right.
But the core does not change, that the product has to be valuable for at least some set of users.
Mhm.
Otherwise, whatever experience you build on onboarding is not going to move the needle too much.
Got it. Got it. By the way, the audience who are actively participating, actively listening here, I would want all of you guys to just place your questions. If you find any other challenges and all, we will address them post our finishing stages of this particular discussion. So, few other challenges before we go to how to do it. So, when we are looking at it, everybody, the mantra is retention, because it is always better not to look at the acquisition part, but retention is always great to just keep the customer in hold, improve the loyalty factor of it. But majority of us have no clue how that and onboarding can actually work hand in hand. And then some of the industries, primarily applications are not a great winning stories there. At least
Yeah,
people have a lot of thoughts that no, this is not for my industry, not for my business, and so on and so forth. Even then they do it just for the sake of digital transformation and all of that. But we all have the challenge that we need to be relevant to various audiences. If we are not there
sure.
actively there and technically, then you're kind of it's as equivalent as people deleting your application or uninstalling, which serves no purpose, just to show the number of downloads,
Yeah,
but you're not making money. So I want you to touch upon these
sure.
areas when you take up
So,
the next
so Arun, before we move forward, I definitely want to cover that one point. Retention is more important than acquisition.
point.
I think this is a fact which many people kind of forget as they're
Hmm.
building products.
Hmm.
Uh, a retained user. See, when does retention happen? Retention happens is when the user comes to your platform
Right.
and actually gets activated. So whatever is the core action which that. So if you're talking about an app, whatever is the core action on that app, only when they start doing that
Hmm.
is when you have a hope that they will be retained, right? Because otherwise, if they've just played around with it, not done any core action,
Right.
there
Right.
is the not and activation for each app is going to be different. You have to define based on your business and your product what is activation for it.
Right.
But retention is so critical in a lot of ways, right? So, and that is where onboarding may play a big role in terms of if you can explain the key value proposition to the person when they come in
Hmm.
and immediately give them nudges around how to get activated.
Hmm.
That's the strongest way you can actually keep these keep them retained on your platform, because otherwise people download a product just to try it out, and if they have not done the key retention action, right, or sorry, the key activation action,
Activation.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it doesn't help, right? So if you look at different categories, say if it's a news or a content kind of a platform,
Hmm.
only if you acquire some signals from the user when they're coming during onboarding, what are the categories they like, what are the categories they want information on,
Hmm.
that is a then there's a chance that they will become activated, where they will use the app a few times. And
Hmm.
it depends on the product, on how they would who would they would consider an active user, right? So
Hmm.
different products have had these different things. I think Twitter, when they were growing, they saw that only when someone follows 13 people or 15 people, I forgot the number,
Hmm.
then there's a much higher chance of that user being retained. So, in a scenario like that, then you will definitely build that into your onboarding on how do you get them to follow X number of people.
So the key
Or
word is the activation. How do you
yeah, so
define
you
that
have to
activation?
you have to
How to
define
work?
what is an activated user for you based on your data, based on your value proposition of your product, and then ensure that how can you activate maximum number of users through
Uh-huh.
onboarding, through other nudges, and that is how you retain users, right? Because otherwise, it's like if you have run an app, what you would see if you're using advertising, right?
Hmm.
A lot of people come in, and then they just if you look at the retention curves for most products in
Hmm.
day one, and after one day most of them lose like 70-75% of the user, maybe even a higher number, right?
Yeah,
in
that's
fact
true.
in fact after 3 months, if your retention curve flattens out, so
Hmm.
there's a steep drop, and after 3 months, if it flattens out and it's more than 10-15%,
Hmm.
that itself is a great app. So that shows you that it's working out very well. So, that this is one point I wanted to bring out. The other thing is, if your product is primarily attracting users through advertising, and
Uh-huh.
mainly it's not coming through word of mouth and or other factors, organically not users are not coming in,
Uh-huh.
and say your app has two three key different things people can do on the product,
Uh-huh.
then what is going to happen is that in your advertising you will definitely be using some kind of deep links where they land right inside the product. They don't go through all of those onboarding steps, right? So you have to keep in mind that how do you explain things to this user when they come in? Can there be some nudges? Can there be some mini onboarding when they launch, when they
Okay.
reach that page? So
Hmm.
don't look at onboarding as just those initial 3 screens or 4 screens which you put in, right?
Right, right.
Think of it
And
on a slightly broader level. On
correct.
different
And
users, what would be the experience for them?
so consider as many users as possible, and then consider that to be like different segment of users, so that the onboarding
Yeah.
process is like continuous story, not that one time.
So I think the key thing is testing, right? So no one knows what is working for the users, right? So
Mhm.
looking at data to figure out what becomes an activated user, and then looking at data to figure out any changes if I do in the onboarding and the initial experience, how does it impact my activation percentage? So first is activation, then is retention, right? If you don't activate the guy, definitely you're not going to retain that user.
Got it, got it. So just to have a user on the platform just for having sake doesn't make sense. So
Yeah,
technically, great
yeah.
point.
So
So
yeah, go ahead. Let's move on.
yeah, so from here on, Ashutosh, ball is in your court. So I want you to touch upon those areas from the practitioner's perspective, and then help us with any anecdotes from your experience and stuff like that.
Sure. So let's move to the next slide.
Yeah.
So I think this is a very very fundamental way in which there are two different ways in which people look at onboarding at a very high level.
Mhm.
So one approach can be you tell users what our app can do for you, and the other is what can you do with our app. Now they sound very similar, but from a philosophy and approach perspective, they are very different. The first one keeps on telling you about the features, that what can you do on
Right.
this,
Yeah.
matlab what the app can do, what are the features of the app, right? Second fake focuses more on how this app makes your life better, what can you do with this.
So that's like the
So
more benefits part of it.
yeah, so if I take an example, if you look at say something like Headspace or any of these meditation apps, right? Or
Right.
so they focus a lot on how your life gets better, right? On
Mm.
what you can do with our app. They're not talking about just the fact that you can meditate or you can do guided meditation. They're talking about the what you can do with this, right? So as an example, Headspace. So I've not used it for. I mean, I've been using it for a while, so I've not seen the latest onboarding. But what I remember from Headspace was that they would do a lot of stuff about educating you around how your sleep can get better while you're
Right.
using this app, right? So
Okay.
what can you do with this? So there are two very different approaches. I'm not saying any one is a right or wrong approach, but depending on your context and your product and your users, you could experiment with both of them to see which works well. Or if you are in a category where there are other bigger players who are very successful, then you can see what kind of approach are they following. Maybe it's a higher chance that that kind of an approach works. So it's a very philosophical difference, but it is a big difference around how do you go about designing your whole onboarding approach and experience. Just to keep one thing to keep in mind is that there is no right and wrong answer, right? Because every product is
Correct.
different, and
Correct.
every customer, the kind of customers you're going after is different. These are just broad guidelines what we're talking about today. And you start with the guidelines, you experiment, and then you figure out what is best for your particular type of customer
Yeah.
or for your particular use case, right?
True.
And
True.
tomorrow, if you're launching a product which no one else has done before, a completely new category,
Hmm.
then probably you have to find out your own truth. But these could be some guidelines for you to start and then experiment and go forward.
Got it. Got it. So practically, experimentation is the only mantra here, I guess.
It's the biggest mantra for any app, I think.
Right.
So just wanted to cover something at a very high level. So, some of the basic building blocks of onboarding could be feature promotion or instructions which teach you how to use the app, or, they're asking you for data. They're asking you for data as you're going through this, right? And we'll go a little bit more in detail as we go forward. But, one point I wanted to bring about is, uh, you should show the user what is the value they're getting from it before you start asking them for a lot of data or a lot of things from them, right?
Right.
So unless they figure out the value, so either you are a very evolved product which everyone is in the world is using, and then you can probably get away with taking a lot of information.
Mhm.
But in a normal scenario, it's better to show them the value before you ask them for information. And especially if you're asking them for, say, a location information or something which is about user privacy, right? It's always a good practice to explain it there. Why do you need this, and how would this make their life better, or the experience on the product better, or how would this improve things, right? So say if you need for a particular thing you need location, then definitely make sure, maybe it's a shopping app, right? It's a grocery delivery kind of a product, right? So their location is because so I can show you results from near you or stores near you or something, right?
Right.
So there has to be, show them the value also. Don't assume that. See, some things are very obvious to us when we're building the product, that this field is for this reason, this is for this reason, right? But someone seeing the product for the first time may or may not know,
Yeah.
especially if you're launching in a country like India where a big proportion of the population is just getting online at some level, right? They've just got an Android phone, they've just started using some of these products. So unless they see value, they may not be open to, giving you too much information. Also, if you look at just human behavior at some level, right?
Hmm.
The human behavior is that, if someone comes to you and always asking you for things without giving you anything in return, be it
Hmm.
information, be it anything else, you don't like that experience, right? People want reciprocity, right? That if someone is taking a favor from me today, tomorrow I can ask that person for a favor. Similarly, from a product perspective, also they are. So if you're asking for some information, they have to see some value, and before you ask them for the next piece of information or the third piece of information. So something to be careful about. Also, upfront, again, this depends on your product, but upfront, think of what would be the biggest question in the user's mind when they start experimenting or start trying out your product, and
Right.
how can you add that in the onboarding. So the example I showed here is from Google Docs, right?
Hmm.
And it's a very, it's a very realistic assumption that anyone going to Google Docs right now may have used Word in the past, or they have documents which are in MS Word. So one of the first things they focus on in the onboarding, or maybe second, third thing they focus on onboarding is telling people that it's compatible with Word. So while they're talking about the key features, but they're also telling them it's compatible with Word, so that some people who may drop out at this point of time or may not discover that they're compatible with Word may not become sticky users. But when you see this, you may feel, okay, fine, I maybe don't need to take a Microsoft license. It's my home computer. I can use Google
Right.
Docs.
Right.
And anytime I need to give it to, send it in another format, it is compatible with Word. Or if a document comes in Word, I can still use it, right? So now it may not be needed because now everyone knows about Docs. So it's a
Right.
similar scenario. But at the initial stage, this is very, very important when you're launching the product at some point of time. So this maybe goes back to the circle you had drawn, right? Initial users or initial start
Right.
of the app.
Yeah.
There it's much more important.
Hmm.
Over a period of time, I think maybe they can figure out in which markets this is important. Maybe in a new market they're launching this is very important. In a
Right.
stable market, maybe this may not be a critical criteria.
Got it.
So that's how they can look at it. There are also a lot of small interactions you can do in onboarding, which can actually add value to the user. So just as an example, sometimes when you're onboarding, some data is getting loaded, or some API call is happening. Those loading spinners and those kind of animations are done, right? You can show some of this stuff. But
Hmm.
if you look at, and again, going back to the example of meditation app, but one big thing, this Calm and Headspace, what they do is initially when that loading is happening, they just show an animation which asks you to breathe in and breathe out with the timing, right? So it goes up, then breathe in and then breathe out,
Right.
which actually is one of the core values of the product, right? It's trying to make you calmer. And even in the onboarding, before you've given any data, before everything is loading, they have done that piece, and which immediately
That's an
hooks on to the
interesting one.
user.
Yeah. That's.
It hooks you on. You suddenly get some value from the product without even going in. So while it may not be possible for every product, but there's something people should brainstorm and think through. Is there some value I can give them even when this loading is happening? Anything which is kind of related to what my product does.
Got it. Got it.
Okay. Let's move on. Yeah. So basically, what I want to talk about here was that the three major ways or three different approaches to onboarding. There's a benefits based approach, there's a function based approach, and then there's a progressive approach. And I'm sorry, the slides are not very clear. I don't know if it's unclear for you guys also. I mean, the images are not very clear. But let me just talk through it. So when you're looking at a benefits based approach, right, where your onboarding is about the benefits, one key thing to keep in mind is do not show all the benefits which the product has. If it has multiple things which you can do, right, try to focus on maybe two to three key benefits which the product has, something primary and maybe one or two more. The others they can discover once they go in, because if the user is not hooked with your primary benefit, then there's a very, very low chance that some of those smaller, pieces, functionality which you have will retain those users, right? So this also makes sure that the message does not get very confusing. They understand the two key benefits or the three key benefits of the product, and they move forward. So that's a best practice in terms of when you're doing benefits based thing. The other thing is that, if you have 3 or 4 screens of onboarding, do not show more than one benefit in one screen. Let them see that benefit, and of course always have the option to skip, because a lot of evolved users do not like the fact that you're explaining them too much in onboarding, right? So you should, every step of onboarding, you should definitely have the option for them to skip and go in.
Right.
There are a ton of people who like directly going in and
Explain.
figuring it out
Yeah.
on their own. So do not make the experience painful for them, for these users. So always make sure there's a skip option.
Hmm.
uh, and also, some of this also goes into UX writing at some level, that you use very consistent vocabulary. Uh, and there's a limited real estate space there, right? So if you do a simple experiment, that you go to the Play Store and look at some of the high performing apps, you would see all the benefits in each screen explained in very concise, very little language. So it would not be verbose. It'll
Right.
be very concise language, and also they keep some consistency. So if you're using, say, humor as an approach, you will use humor throughout. If you're using something else as an approach, you will keep that throughout. So they don't want to confuse the messaging around it, right? They want to just follow one consistent theme, and also consistent vocabulary. It should
Right.
not go suddenly being very formal to very informal to something else. Kind of breaks the whole chain of how the user is thinking about your product.
I think that's a great input for the marketing for function, right? Who typically writes the messaging on the onboarding part, following that
So,
consistency with the theme and with the language and all of
so
that.
I think, Arun, one good thing has happened in India also now of late,
Hmm.
that earlier, this was, anyone was writing content for the app.
Hmm.
Sometimes the engineer, sometimes the product manager, sometimes someone from marketing. But I think of late we have now have a consistent UX writing function. People who are trained in writing the UX for that,
True.
for the product. And more companies are now actually hiring UX writers to revamp the whole experience. So these are the people who sit with product to understand what is the key value proposition, but then also figure out how do we message it. They also work with
Yeah.
marketing, but
Right.
it's become a specialized function all over the world. And now in India also, we are having people coming in doing this. And of
Hmm.
course, if you are a small company or a small startup, of course, you cannot afford to have a UX writer, but you can read a lot about that and realize that it's a specialized function now. So,
Right.
not only the onboarding, every step of the app there, these guys are writing it. So that's become a very specific function. So, yeah,
Right.
so this was benefits. But then if you look at function oriented, then again, the main focus here is to help them get started in terms of instructions on what to do to get started. So you then don't bog yourself with too much with benefits. You just you are this kind of assumes that you kind of know what are the main benefits of the product. You
Hmm.
do very little touch up on that, but you explain the functionality. But of course, you don't explain the very obvious functionality. You explain something which is slightly complicated. So makes more sense for a product which has some complicated element in it. Uh, and then this you have function based, and then you have progressive, where you take the user through different steps, and you have these pop-ups coming in explaining what is happening, what you need to do. Or maybe it could be gesture driven also. When they swipe, something happens.
Right.
Like a lot of cool products now would have this, that they show some hero image, and you can pull it up, pull it down to see some details.
Hmm.
So you can use this also. So again, there is no I would say hard and fast rule in terms of which one to use, but you tailor your plan according to your product, your audience, your users, and of course be ready to change based on user research or based on data what you're seeing on the platform.
Right.
So very important to do this. Also from a if you have an onboarding or where you're asking a lot of information from the user because it's required in your product, very, very important to show some kind of a progress update, that how much is done, right? Maybe a bar on the top, say, hey, you're done with 30%, 40%,
Yeah.
80%, 100%. So users know how much more inputs are they supposed to give,
Right.
because it's not people drop off at any stage. Many people could even drop off at the onboarding stage especially if you're asking for information which they consider private without explaining the value of it. Why should they give it to you?
Right.
So you can have multiple ways where they drop off, but
Mm,
giving a progress update definitely kind of helps.
correct.
And I know people are typing in some questions. Guys, we'll take the questions at the end, Arun, right? Or do we want to take the questions now?
No, let's do it in the end so that we can cover all the information so that people
Okay,
who don't have questions can be, taking the advantage. And for those people who have questions, they can even spend 5-10 minutes after the session. We can just
sure,
extend it later.
sure. And maybe the other point I wanted to cover for here was that you know, ask things at the right moment. So somewhere it goes. So say if you have a D2C app, let them try out some functionality of it before you ask them for you know the full sign up or something. You can also do that. That once they have taken the step, when they're completing the whole thing, then you ask them for it. Again, this is something you have to experiment and figure out,
Yeah.
because some people would be, a majority of them would be just casual explorers who are just trying out your product to see what it is, right? How
Right.
does it work? Is it better? So they may not want to do a lot of these steps before they see some value. They see some value, then they're like, okay, this makes sense, and then they may do it. And the whole point about casual and interactive is that somewhere you have to motivate them with some behavior. You can do a lot of that, enable them to do something, and somewhere you don't want the user to do something. So that is something which you explain there in the onboarding. So as an example, if you're running a social media or say some kind of a forum, right? So from a constraining behavior perspective, somewhere in the onboarding you would want to explain that be respectful to other people, do not put that kind of content, and some of that stuff, right? Maybe whatever, it depends on your policy. So it's good to nudge people, explain to them what is okay, what's not okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on, Arun.
Yeah. So how's about the best practices checklist?
Yeah, let's go up. So I can. So I don't think the slide has moved on here. Uh, Maybe there's a lag just for me. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So I think some of this we already covered. So
Yeah.
I'll go through this quickly because I want to be mindful of time. So maybe I want to finish this in the next say 10 minutes. So Arun, you have some time to cover some of the other stuff, and then we can
Sure.
go to questions.
Sure. Sure.
Uh, so, so I think this we kind of touched upon that. Prioritize the value proposition, the key value proposition for people. A little bit of a app content preview. If you can show them something, show them in the onboarding, and make use of empty states is more about once they're finished onboarding. It's the last step. Say if you are say you're something like Instagram, right? I'm going there for the first time
Mm-hmm.
and I have not followed any user. I go in, so I see a blank feed, right? I don't see anything. So there's a nudge for me to create content, add a photo. Similarly, for your product, depending on what your product key action is, if the user has not taken any key action and there's an empty screen there, you should have some nudge there, some call to action, and some maybe some explanation, a little bit of animation or something works. Try
Right.
out something so that they know what they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Personalization and gamification is self-explanatory. A little bit of gamification goes a long way depending on what kind of product you are. Personalizing it for their experience makes sense. Taking advantage of success state when they've done the action, you can then nudge them to do more. So that again helps out. And I've kept monitor and track in bold because that again goes back to you should look at all kind of data on what they're doing when they go through the onboarding and when they start it for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Are there things which are unclear? Do they spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to use the product or how to do a particular action on the product? So once you have that data, then you know that this should be part of an explanation in the onboarding. Because if they're taking a lot of time to understand it when they come in, then maybe you can go back, track back, and explain this during the onboarding process itself. And uh, one more thing to keep in mind is that there has to be some consistency between what you're doing in onboarding and the content you have on the Play Store and the App Store, right? So if the user comes in and the happy case scenario, right? This user is organically coming in, right? Organically coming in, or they've just discovered your product. They went to the respective App Store or Play Store. There, the whole language and everything is very different. If the pitch is very different, the key value proposition there is very different. And when they come to onboarding, it's very different. Then it creates a little bit of a doubt in the user's mind, right? Is this what I was looking for? Maybe this is not what it is, right? So somewhere, there has to be some thought process around. There should be overall consistency in the key value proposition across both these places. So
Right.
it's not like another team working on the Play Store, App Store stuff, and someone else are working on onboarding. They both have to work very closely together at some level.
Got it. Got it. But when you say monitor and track, technically we are again referring to try with various strategies, various ideas, and then keep a
Yeah.
track
So
of things, funnel it out, and
so
things like that. Right?
various strategies probably the second step. First step is whatever you have launched, monitor and track the data. What is happening on, where are people getting stuck? What are they doing on the
Okay.
platform?
Okay.
What are the things that you wanted them to do but they're not doing?
Mm-hmm.
And then you build some nudges for that in the onboarding itself. You figure out how you handle that in onboarding. See if changes something, or see if you need to completely revamp the onboarding.
Got it. Got it.
So based on that, monitor, track, and I think it's a very consistent process. So if you see most successful apps, it's not as if they've always had the same onboarding. They
Exactly.
keep on changing it based on how their user profile changes, kind of people come in, things keep on changing based on that.
Right.
Okay, let's move to the next one. Next slide. I think in this one, I mainly wanted to just talk about the fact that why the initial experience when they use the app for the first time, which is like, so like when you have a physical product, like when if you ever buy a physical product from Apple,
Mm-hmm.
be it a phone or a laptop, just the whole experience of unboxing it is very beautiful. Just opening the box, they spend a lot of effort in designing. So you the first interaction with the product is very beautiful. You start loving the product as soon as you interact with it, even before turning it on, right?
Right.
Similarly, at some level, it's very critical for a person designing this thing to focus mostly on the initial experience. So if we look at just the onboarding sequence right now, uh, most important, the onboarding has to be for people who have not seen the product, who are discovering the product for the first time,
Right.
or people who are very very casual users, so they're not power users at some level, or they're just discovering it. They've come in, they've probably seen it once or twice. Your whole experience somewhere has to be built around that.
Right.
What ends up happening is that a lot of time we focus on people who have we assume that the user understands the product, and we build the onboarding that way. But see, your growth is going to come from new users. See, the user who's already come in is not going to see the onboarding ever again, right?
True.
Or the user who's heard, say, Arun is my friend, Arun has told me about a product, this is what it does.
Mm-hmm.
So I went, or he sent me a link to download, or I went ahead and I downloaded it. So I already know what the product does, right?
True.
So so I am not very critical. So for me, onboarding is not important. Most probably, I'm the guy who'll skip onboarding. I'll just go in. I'll skip the whole explanation in the onboarding.
Right.
It's
Right.
most critical for people who are coming there for the first time, who don't know much about it. That's where onboarding really helps.
Right.
And what I also want to point out here was that most teams keep on focusing on building new features to make people engage more, right? Uh, so they keep on doing more and more things for users. But when you're trying to grow your product, most of the features which you build are not going to help. So if you look at that curve on the top, that in blue, I'm sorry, it's not very clear, but it's a retention curve which shows that how you lose users between the first day to day 3, day 7, end of month 1, end of month 2.
Right.
The problem is we keep on focusing too much on building more and more new features. Instead, if you want growth, if you have a product which has a key value proposition which is working, you should actually focus on adjacent users who have not been using the product, who are close, very close to using the product, but maybe have to be explained the value a little bit better.
Got it.
And that's where it becomes again important in onboarding. For a new user, if they can not discover the key feature in the onboarding, they may just come into the platform, play around with a little bit, not discover the key feature, and go away. So there's going to be zero retention for these guys, right?
Of course.
And again, this the last point I already covered. This is something which you can get insights based on data. Is what it needs to get a user activated. And probably this happens once you have enough users, so you have some statistically relevant data.
Right.
But all the popular products have figured this out. That what does it need? So for Facebook, I think it was adding 13 friends or 7 friends, if I remember the number correctly, after which people were retained on the platform. For
Oh, okay.
different products, it's different, right? I think at some level, so it's not just just for the feature. So we think of onboarding just in the sense that it's for the whole product, but
Mm-hmm.
also when you launch some very critical new feature into the product, sometimes you build a nudge or onboarding there. So I'll
Right.
give you an example. So if you look at stories, which are there now on all social platforms, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I look at what is important for me to make people use that stories feature, the most important user for me is the user who's never ever posted a story. So somewhere when they click, when they go there to the story section,
Mm-hmm.
I have to explain to them very, very clearly how does the story work, what kind of privacy controls they have to activate them, to make them
Mm-hmm.
users, right? So
Mm-hmm.
somewhere, sometimes you have to also think of onboarding inside the product also for different new features which you're launching.
Right.
So just keep that in mind. Okay, let's move on to the next one. I think this more or less we've kind of covered this. Maybe one small point I wanted to bring out here is that customize the keyboard for the type of query. If you're asking them to enter numbers, then make sure that the keyboard opens up that way. Anything
Right.
you're trying to do, whatever you can, make it easier for them. Make it easier for them. And experiment is the key message here. I think that's what you need to do. Uh, let's move on. I think there's some behavior patterns I wanted to talk about. I'll very quickly go through this. I'll be mindful to be mindful of time, right? So I think anchor effect basically talks about the fact that users depend a lot on the initial piece of information when making a decision. So that's where your onboarding and the first experience after onboarding should establish the key value. If they see that value, they will stick around. There are a lot of people who download a product, complete, leave midway through the onboarding, or just complete the onboarding, see something they don't like, and leave immediately. So there's a lot of a lot of things we can do here to make sure they anchor onto a key value proposition. Uh, Again, people think something is valid when they receive correlated and consistent information, right? So again, this goes back a little bit to the point which I said, that your whole consistency should be there in terms of what your ad says when you get acquiring these users,
Right.
what your Play Store, App Store description says, and what your onboarding says, right? There
Mm-hmm.
has to be some consistency there in terms of how this is laid out, and if you can show cause and effect, some kind of a sequence, that makes it even stronger. Uh, okay. So somewhere, maybe the key point is here is that you could maybe use humor to get people, aware about this in onboarding, but then your entire aspect of the onboarding has to be a little bit humoristic, or somewhere, if the users can have seen a process working, then they find it shorter. So the well traveled road effect is nothing but, if you've already, so it's like from human psychology. If you've gone to a place once, if you drive down to a place which you think is very far, usually driving back feels shorter. Even if it's not shorter in terms of actual time, it feels shorter because you've already traveled down that road. So maybe in onboarding, if you have a complicated onboarding where they're supposed to do a lot of stuff, a quick demo which shows with pre-filled fields that what is happening, what are you supposed to do,
Okay.
makes them perceive it as faster. It may still not be faster, but you're talking about human psychology, right? So they may feel that this is faster now because they know what needs to be done. They will not get stuck anywhere, so they can do this. So I think we can move on, Arun. I think we want to just go on to the summary and then we can go on to questions.
Yeah. So Ashutosh, just from the user standpoint, from the audience standpoint, just wanted to summarize here. So you were mentioning that UI design is the key at the end of the day. So whatever your product is going to say, unless it has some meat on it, you cannot really go to the next stages. But however, to make it again, onboarding is obviously the necessity of the art. But you're
Yeah.
suggesting to you chunking where you are taking in small bits of information in a very continuous manner and in a systematic manner so that you're not rubbing the
Yeah.
user on the wrong side, on the perception side of it. And then we
So
are
Arun,
looking at,
one point I just want to quickly say on your first point, right?
sure.
So uh, again, the UI design, why it is so critical, goes back to human psychology. And there have been
Mm-hmm.
enough number of studies done, which say that, if you look at human behavior, right? So people, so whatever in a particular culture is traditionally considered attractive, if there's an attractive person, people perceive them to be more trustworthy and better. In an
Mm-hmm.
interview, if there are two people with the similar skill set, similar performance, most interviewers, based on studies, have gone for whatever is considered better looking in that particular culture. So we all have this bias. This bias is there very, very strongly. And the way it plays out in products is any product which is very well designed, which is very, very well designed, looks very good, or the experience UI or UX is very good, is perceived to be a better product, may or
Right.
may not be a better product, right? So if I just give you an example of, say, an iPhone versus an Android phone, right? There are so many features which iOS
Yes.
has copied from Android 1 year later, 1.5 year later, right?
Some of them
But
are not yet
when
even copied.
and no, but when they announce it,
Yeah.
right? When they
Yeah.
announce it, it's the whole world, or at least the iOS ecosystem, believes it's a new innovation, and they start believing that this is making their life better. This is done in a much better way than what was done on Android. So while I agree, maybe some things may be better on iOS, but it's also the whole design aspect of it. It's
Right.
just the perception that people feel that this is better, right? So overall, that's why it plays a key role around the whole design process. Plays a how it looks plays a key role in how people perceive it. But yeah, go on. I think just wanted to bring that out even more strongly.
Sure. And then when we are talking about the behavioral aspects, and when you're suggesting users to experiment, 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 the key mantra, be it a product guy or a marketing guy, has to keep in mind. Typically, you need to look at data first approach, where right from the demographics to the usage data,
Yeah,
you need sophisticated systems in place where you can do a superior segmentation so that you can try personalizing whatever you're doing from onboarding to engagement. You can hyper personalize it and also try various experimentations with this whole strategy of what to send, when to send, and how to send informations. And try gamification is the last mantra that you were suggesting, that to make it more lively, irrespective of which industry it is. At the end of the day, we all should believe the fact that we are building applications to a human on the other side. So
yeah,
the
yeah,
way you feel, the same way your customer feel, and you as a customer to multiple applications also feels the same way. So maybe the view towards gamification should be more from how can I make it more lively, and not from the third process of gamification is more childish and not relevant to my industry. So this brings to the fact that we are talking about a lot of jargons and the best practices and all of that. And you might be wondering where Upshot comes into the play. So Upshot was built exactly to match onto these requirements, because most of you are already working on one product or the other, and which means that the architecture is laid out, the systems are laid out, you already have some boundaries within which you need to work on. And now you cannot just change because now you heard something great from Ashutosh or Arun. And now you cannot go back to the drawing board again, redesign the entire application and stuff like that. So, what we are trying to do from Upshot is giving you multiple things that are needed for a product management person or a digital marketer to primarily look at his app for whatever stage it is, and Upshot being on top of it can give them a ready boost in terms of increasing the way they are currently running various activities on their application, right from onboarding to the engagement to loyalty and rewards and so on and so forth. And as Upshot was built primarily as an SDK, so you don't really have to work a lot on changing anything from the business logic standpoint. So you just have to integrate Upshot lines of code on top of your application. And when we are looking at a need to integrate or to connect with Upshot systems to your backend systems or vice versa, it has APIs that are needed, which will help you to pull data or push data from the system or into the system, and then helps you get quickly to the speed of the world, so that your app, no matter whether that is a great application or a mediocre application, it can add a lot of tools like the sophisticated segment engine that we use, which will help you do a lot of activities, especially the experimentation part that Ashutosh was suggesting. And then along with the experimentation, you can also have the advantage of a lot of analytical engines in the background which practically bring in the artificial intelligence from the backside, which will help you understand the journey that you're actually putting in place, the predictions for the churn that it might have on your application, or the prediction in terms of the conversions in the going forward quarter and things like that. So overall, when you look at the kind of tools that we bring to the table, which are more like a plug and play, pretty much majority of the tools can help you with a systematic onboarding approach where you can do 101 varieties of experimentation with a very less to no coding at all. All we are looking at is customizing the content and then pushing it, and in a very structured manner where everything is run based on rules. So when you understand your customer ecosystem, you can practically build in rules in the background which triggers the kind of onboarding messaging that you want to push to the client, be it by giving them a trivia based story or by screen tips, or which is more like nudging them at various points, or adding gamification by the progress bars or giving them points to complete or for badges and stuff like that. So you can practically use Upshot to your advantage, which will help you with your entire online engagement, be it on your website or on a mobile application, which will by default will convert into a better customer experience stories, which thereby translate into much more revenues for the company or much more user engagement and the wow factor in your application. So that is what we want to cover today. So we will get back to questions and answers. We are sorry for the 10-minute delay to start. So I want you guys to bear with us to hear out what our fellow guys are asking in terms of questions, and then we will answer them as much as possible now. So we have, okay, Parag, you will get a copy of the deck. May not be like a deck, you will get the video of the whole session. And some of your favorite finds and best onboarding applications. Ashutosh, anything apart from Headspace?
So, so I think some of the things I already spoke about, but I think I recently saw very good use of humor in onboarding for a product. There's a weather app called Carrot where they use they have actually given a personality to the app. So when you go in the onboarding, they
Hmm.
actually ask you what kind of personality do you want. From it can be very nice to you in terms of messaging to it can become like really nasty to you. So
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
found that very, very interesting on how they've given the product a personality and the user chooses it. So I found that, but I think the biggest, I would say, some of the favorite finds have been a lot of these apps, which are, say, your Headspace kind of apps or apps which are, primarily a one-to-one interaction between the user and the app. These guys are focused a lot on onboarding and have done some really cool things, primarily around explaining the whole value proposition very quickly. So that's how that's I would say some of my favorite finds. But I've really liked apps which have used humor at some level. But you have to be careful because this carrot was primarily built for the US audience or the Western audience because those guys are heavy users of weather apps, right? But
Hmm.
maybe in an India context, while they're live on the India, at least they're on the App Store. I don't know if they're on the Play Store or not. That may not work because weather is not a thing which most Indian users look at daily.
Right.
Unlike the Western world, because the weather changes so frequently that people look at weather 3-4 times a day. So for
Hmm.
our scenario, may not work. But I've seen some very good examples of humor and some very good examples of explaining the key value proposition.
Hmm.
Slack does a pretty good onboarding, and Slack takes it to the next level. So not only just their onboarding, they keep all their messaging very topical. So
Hmm.
the latest release they did on the Play Store and App Store a few days ago, they did not talk about the features and all. They just spoke about in the current scenario, are you doing okay? Is everyone doing okay? They had a very nice mental health kind of a message, right?
Okay.
Which while may not fit into the app per se, but they were being very topical around what people are feeling right now. And they can afford to do it because everyone knows them, right? If you're
Right.
a new app, probably you cannot play around with that. But different people have done different things to, kind of figure this out.
Okay. So, Ashutosh, my next one would be, counteract biases through onboarding. So, any one good example, or maybe from your experience in your application ideas.
See, but I think the biggest bias all of us need to be careful about is what is called the confirmation bias, right? So any data we look at, If it confirms what we already believe, we believe that data. And if it does not, if it goes against our belief, we normally tend to ignore it. I mean, it's a
Mhm.
bias which all of us have to some varying degrees. But so, example, if you feel that, say, you know, so again, the problem is that when you're building, say, an onboarding experience, right?
Mhm.
And you may be doing a lot of experimentation. So you're working with your team. You believe in something fundamentally that this is how it should be done, or this is how this is done, right? Even and then when you look at data, some of the data might be proving it. A lot of the data may be against it, but you
Mhm.
will end up only believing that data which proves it, be it experimental data, be it when you're talking to customers. So we all have this confirmation bias that we believe that something which we strongly believe, we are not ready to look at data which is against it. So this is something to be very careful about. uh, and I think another bias to look at is, say, if you're a designer or you're a product person working on this, right? The founder or your VP or someone has said that this thing should be done in a particular way. So
Mhm.
most people end up following that instead of building exactly what according to what the customer wants. So more of trying to get an approval around authority
Yeah.
figures and all
Yeah.
that stuff. So there are I think for designers and for product people, I think one good way to look at this is to read a little bit more about human psychology. Humans behave exactly the same way with apps or products, the way they behave with each other and the kind of biases they have with each other, right? So you
Right.
should read a little bit more about it. We'll give you a little bit more insights around how to go about this.
I think there is one other question Vanshita is asking, which typically is what questions one need to ask before building the whole customer onboarding program.
I think the key question you need to ask the team, yourself, and maybe potential users is, what is the one key value proposition of this product? What is the one key thing for which people will use this product, right? If you can figure out the key proposition, that would become one of the main parts of your onboarding. So that would be one. The other is a little bit more understanding of your user base. What kind of users are you going to be targeting?
Mhm.
Depending on that, you will figure out how much explanation is needed during onboarding. So if you are targeting, like, say, well-educated evolved users at some level, or evolved users who've been using different apps for a long time, then maybe you can keep things simpler, as opposed to when you're targeting users of a particular way. So I'll give you an example. One of my startups which I did was a platform, an app called Hush. So we were a platform for Indian employees to discuss things anonymously about their company.
Mhm.
So, but when they came into the app, the first thing they needed to do was enter their official in the onboarding, enter their official email address. We would send a one-time OTP to their email, and then they could verify that they work for, say, TCS or some other company, right? And
Okay.
when they verify, they would get access to the community of that company. So when we launched this, initially, there were a lot of people who had we saw a lot of people dropping off at that stage when we asked for the official email address, because they were, even though we were an anonymous platform, people were worried that their information might go back to their company if they write anything about their company, or if they give their company email ID. So
Right.
once we saw this, and we did a little bit of user research, and we figured out that a lot of people were hesitant in giving the ID because they were afraid that the company will take some action against them, right? So
Mhm.
that's where what we did was that we made a good explanation right there when they were entering this. We actually explained the technical details that once you enter the email ID, there's only one email which goes to you. After that, we do a one-way hash of the data. So forget anyone else. Even our team cannot figure out anyone's identity. All we know is that you are person A works at Flipkart, person B works at uh, say some other company, Dell or Target or something, right?
Uh-huh.
So we had to explain that to the user at that stage, and then we saw a sudden jump in the number of people verifying themselves fully before coming into the platform. So I think the questions you ask kind of change with the kind of product you're building, but key value proposition. In fact, I think you should reverse it. So before, when you're designing this, right, you should think through what are the reasons why someone who downloads this app may not use the app. What are the things they would be worried about, or what are the things which will make them not use the app, not use the product, not get activated? And that will give you some ideas in terms of what to add in the onboarding. So this is also an approach which people use to get right answers, is just reversing the whole problem. Instead of saying why will they use it, why will they not use it, and then you might find some new insights which you can build in the onboarding.
Great, great. So, Ashutosh, now we are going to the intermediate users who have some more interesting questions. So, can you
Yeah.
give us any example, like, you have seen an application where there is a complex functionality or a feature, and any good onboarding stuff they tried, anything that comes to your mind? Like, usually the feature was complex, but they did a great job where we can learn.
So I'll give you an example. Now it's very, very simple for everyone to understand. But when UPI came out, right,
Hmm.
and all the payments app which are built on UPI, so a key step there is to activate your UPI ID, where you have to send a SMS from your phone, which binds your device to binds your device, and then your UPI thing is activated, right? So
Hmm.
initially, when this awareness was, now it's like a standard procedure. Everyone knows, right, that you need to do this. But I think initially people were hesitant. So most of these products, most of these apps, actually spent a very good, explained that in a very nice way in terms
Hmm.
of why is this needed? Why does your phone, why do you need to send that SMS? Because payment apps and all, people get a little hesitant about giving any information, sending any message. What if my money would be taken out by sending this SMS, right? People
Right,
read a
right.
lot of these things. So, they've had, if you look at experiences of most of them, they've handled this very well. I don't know whether when I onboarded on those apps a while ago, so I don't know whether they're still doing it. But in my mind, even now to get growth in tier C, tier three, tier four towns where people are getting aware of this for the first time, it's very critical to explain that feature very well. Explain the security thing very well. That hey, unless you initiate with a code and everything else, payment cannot go from your account, right? Because
Right.
otherwise people are hesitant. So I have seen that as a good example, which now doesn't seem like a complex feature, but earlier
Right.
people
They
would
need to
consider
work
that a
around the
complex.
biases, no, primarily.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, so you have to explain it to them, make it more easy.
Great. So I have a question which I want to answer to Madhusudan. So how long must the initial onboarding experience last? Also, when an app is a super app with multiple app functionalities and broaden its scope, should we focus on the overall value proposition or a list of features? I think, Madhu, from what Ashutosh has actually spoken today, it is an ever-going process, and more often not, onboarding is not like one solution fit all kind of a story. So you can practically segment your audience based on their usage patterns, the data that you're capturing from their usage path. So you can use a sophisticated segmentation tool and then kind of target those audience for those functionalities for which you want to use onboarding. So there is nothing like a right or wrong. Again, Ashutosh has repeated it multiple times. So it is all about experimenting, and I don't think there is a typical defined timeline as such for this should be the initial onboarding or not. Because in these days, because we come from app development background, XTube Labs is our parent company. We have built close to 900 plus applications as of date, which includes games, AR, VR, IoT, and all of that. So earlier, the standard story is when you build an application, maybe you have to build a little more component like an animated story, which typically serves the purpose of onboarding, like the guided tour of the whole application and all. But these days, with the product like Upshot and all, they are just not adding that as part of the development. So once the app is launched, it can trigger the rule to Upshot engine, and it can just pop up like a super feature, superlative stuff, superlative layer on the application, and then it can guide the users. And when it comes to the seconds and all, it all depends, Madhu. It all depends on what industry are we looking at, what app you're looking at, and again, experiment, experiment, experiment. When you're trying a specific onboarding content, you can see the analytics for that particular campaign. When you do a particular onboarding story, treat it as a campaign, see the numbers like the monitor and track point that Ashutosh was stressing upon earlier, and then you kind of work around it. So I
So, Madhu, I'm seeing your next comment. Yeah, I think 10 to 20 seconds is probably, yeah, a good duration. Also, as I mentioned, right, you should always have the option to skip at every screen. I mean, whichever screens are skippable,
yeah,
right? Apart
yeah.
from your where you're entering data and all of that stuff, because that is important. And then, if you're talking about a super app with multiple functionalities, I think uh, the key one or two value propositions definitely should be covered.
Hmm.
The others can be done inside. Once they go inside, you can always have that hybrid kind of onboarding, right? That they see two screens, they went in, they logged in, and then there's a either it's a hamburger or it's a bottom navigation, whatever. There is something there, some visual indicator there for them to explore that, and you can do a small snippet and explore it there. So I think probably that's how you should do it. But mainly, I think try it out, see, experiment what works. But yeah, 10-20 seconds is probably long enough. Most
It is.
people don't want it to be too long before they start seeing some value there.
Exactly. So Ashutosh,
But the only difference would be a particular app where too much data is needed for it to be activated there. You might take slightly longer. But then that's maybe your onboarding still will be very small, and that becomes the post onboarding step for them to actually register and all. So it's okay.
so
You can work on that.
great. So Ashutosh, I hope you got your answers right, Madhu. So now we'll move to Casey's questions, which are a little interesting because again, various industries have their own mindset towards looking at the digital aspect overall and then the mobile applications. So when we look at various industries, one interesting question, I never thought of this. So do you think any specific industry is immune to onboarding? Like it's like people just take it for granted and then just download it and use it, no onboarding, isn't it?
I would say some kind of onboarding should be there in every product, because you assuming you start getting a lot of organic users, you want them to understand what the product is. People who have not heard it from someone or from an ad. Of course, everything goes back to experimentation. So it could be very, very light onboarding. Could be very, very light onboarding, but still, I think some kind of and onboarding is everything, right? So even like if you look at Calm and Headspace, they do that breathe in, breathe out as a splash screen. So that's like the first step when you go in, right? So while typically you don't consider that onboarding, but I would consider that also. That's a real estate that people are waiting for something to happen, as opposed to showing them a spinner. You can do something there, right?
Yeah.
So I would say every product needs some kind of onboarding. It's up to you to design the best possible non-intrusive experience, even if
Mm.
it's like one screen, right? So there's still scope to explain something, because definitely the user who's coming organically probably is a higher chance to be retained if you can explain the value proposition better. They have not seen some ad which is making some false claims. They were searching for something, they found this, so there's a high chance you can retain them if you can explain the key value proposition. So I would say a little bit of onboarding should definitely be there.
Okay, great. So
I think some of the metric. I think your question on
yeah,
metrics. I
that
think
is
some of the
true.
metrics definitely should look at is what percentage of people are skipping it as opposed to seeing it. And then definitely, somewhere activation has to be tied in with this. That after seeing the onboarding, do people get activated? Do the key actions or not? And that's where you experiment and do changes in onboarding. Changes could be as simple as just changing the writing there, right? Because when people are seeing, users are seeing it, maybe the UX writing itself is not convincing them right now.
Mhm.
So small changes, test and see what happens, and that will tell you about effectiveness. So yeah, I would say
So
definitely look at
just
activation and
okay. So just the activation and then numbers, and then kind of decide whether that is
activation numbers, and also how many people skip, or do majority of them are skipping it, which
yeah,
which
yeah,
means what step are they skipping it? Maybe that step is redundant. You don't need to do onboarding there. They would rather discover it themselves.
right.
Are there some things they are doing wrong on the platform when they're going in? Are they doing something wrong and they have to correct? Then maybe that is something you could nudge back and come in, add that
Or
in the
even
onboarding at some level.
work backwards and try a different UI or UX for that particular screen, right?
could
Just
could
to
be, or explain it better in the onboarding at some level. If it's
okay.
they're doing something wrong, you could look at that. Definitely, if there is bounce from any of the onboarding pages, right? Is there an onboarding page where they just leave? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
you're asking for some very critical information without explaining the value, so they don't want to give it. So definitely make sure that look at that data, that people who download the app and do not register
Mm-hmm.
basically either are getting leaked out in the onboarding, or they downloaded it thinking something else and it turned out to be something else. Something is going wrong there, right?
Right,
So you
right.
should look at, after whatever is the key action after onboarding, maybe it's registration, whatever is what for your product, right? Look at that percentage also, how that did change. So how many people get leak out at the onboarding stage itself?
Got it, got it. So, any specific common mistakes that you typically see in those companies that you're associated with or you came across, where while structuring the
I
onboarding?
think almost every company, what they get wrong, or many people get wrong, is not testing enough and not continuously experimenting. It's only the bigger companies which focus a lot on testing, right? It's
Okay.
your like the Googles of the world or the bigger companies, the Slacks of the world, who will keep on experimenting. There would be a team experimenting every week, trying to figure out for different cohorts what should be done. Most companies design, like I'm talking smaller companies, right? Most companies design onboarding experience. Everyone likes the design, everyone likes it, and that's where it stops.
Mm-hmm.
So, they don't go deep into the data, even from an onboarding perspective. A lot of people don't give enough value to changes in onboarding, causing a change in the performance of the product. So, I think that's a big mistake where you should keep on, at least someone should be consistently testing, trying out things. Small things make a huge difference in terms of
Right.
the language, the buttons, how they lay out, the color. Things make a huge difference, right? So, I think that is something they should definitely look at.
So, Ashutosh, just a question from my side because the previous explanation triggered this. So, when we are working on a specific onboarding content and then we are seeing result, and then is there a particular point where we should decide that okay, now it is time for experimentation? Is there any specific metric, any kind of a standard or industry stuff that okay, now I'm seeing a dip from a 15% growth month on month to 14, 13, 12 or something, then it is time for me to change my content, or
See,
how do you?
See, overall, you should be testing everything, right? From your Play Store, App Store content, messaging, to your onboarding experience, to your actual product features and everything else, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, as I said at the start, right, an on better onboarding experience cannot improve a bad product or a product which
Of
is not,
course, of course.
providing the value. So, I
Mm-hmm.
would say it is like it's like, you should have a testing philosophy in the company, right? So these things should be being tested consistently, as opposed to once in 6 months doing a refresh of the onboarding. So, and I think someone had a question around what questions you should ask around onboarding, right?
Right, right.
I think more important is, once you have onboarding, you should still do some user research. You still talk to some users to figure out whether they'll, what was the impression of the onboarding experience? Was it helpful, not helpful? Did they have to discover a lot more after that? So I think it's a consistent thing. Do a lot of blind tests, in the sense that before launching a new experience, just show that, maybe just designs, or just show that like a beta version to some users,
Mm-hmm.
get their feel on, observe them whether they're getting stuck, have a user go through the onboarding flow with you, just sit and see, are they using everything the way that you thought they would use it, are they
Mm-hmm.
getting stuck, what is happening. So I think it's a consistent process. So you should have a testing philosophy around everything on the app, not just onboarding, but onboarding also becomes a part of it.
Okay, okay. I think that brings us to the last question, which says, would it be okay to make it non-skippable? Any specific guidelines that ideally we should make it a skippable one, but any thoughts there?
I mean, I'm a little bit of a proponent for giving users more power.
Right.
So, of course, whichever is a mandatory field, if you need them to do login or something else, that of course cannot be skippable.
Mm-hmm.
So, what you can do is, like the way some of these products handle it is that if they need multiple user inputs, they'll take a few inputs. So, say if it's a news app, if there are 50 categories to choose from, to make it easy for the user, I'll say choose at least three, right? So then at least I can give them some experience, whereas most of their users would at least choose 10 to 12 categories. If the user is in a hurry, and I'm just using it as an example, but you could customize this for your own product. You ask them to pick three, but also mention there, in the writing, they mention very clearly, choose at least any three, you can change this later. So
Right,
that they
right.
know that they don't have to put all the effort right now in choosing, they can do it later, right? So similarly, you could nudge the user and explain it to them.
Okay. But for that user research part, just to take their opinion, whether they liked it, not liked it, whatever. So any specific guidelines on the times, that we have to wait for so many hours or so many days or something like that after he or she got on board?
I would say you should also talk to people who are not users yet. Even do research with showing people wireframes or just the final
Mm-hmm.
design, and just talk to them to figure out if this was the app, do they understand what it does from the onboarding? What did they understand from the onboarding? What the
Right.
product does?
Mm-hmm.
Is that value coming out? Because see, for your product to become a viral, heavily used product, maximum growth has to be people discovering it organically. So
Right.
do people who see it on their own understand it or not, right? So I think you can do a lot of research even before launching it, or the first version, with a lot of people who still have not downloaded it.
Right, right.
Always helps to do a small focus group with 5, 10 potential users, call them over, have them download the product, go somewhere, do a, talk to these people, have them download and see in front of you, what do they do? Are there screens they're skipping? Ask them why are they skipping it. Or, some of this, while you can get a lot of data and do analysis data based on quantitative data, some of this qualitative data will give you a lot of insight. So don't let
Right.
it go. I mean, talk to people and get that data.
But Ashutosh, I think just a misunderstanding the question, I guess. So the question was, when should we trigger this research or the opinion poll or survey report for once a user does a transaction, or once you get a feel that he just skip the whole onboarding or whatever. So any specific timeline, like after so
So,
much time?
so that's what I'm saying, Arun. I think you should have you should have a process in which even before you launch it, you do some research with potential users,
Acha, acha, that
maybe
way.
at a wireframe level, just to understand what do they understand this? Do they
Mhm,
understand what is happening,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
And then just keep talking to different users. Definitely, people who are activated, you want to get their opinion on what motivated them or what made it easy for them to get activated. People
Okay,
are, you have to divide it into different cohorts and see.
okay, okay, great. So I think we have covered pretty much all questions, and so sorry, guys, it's been a little delay from our side. And for any other questions, you have my email ID in the blog. So I think ultimately what we're looking at is like if you have a product which is there doing its own stuff, and you want to work on top of it with less changes in the development activity and other stories, I think you should look at a product like Upshot, which can help you do enough number of experimentations and with less of an integration into your overall business logic and so on and so forth. So with that, I would like to end today's webinar. Unless you guys have any other questions, feel free to shoot an email or write it here. Ashutosh, thank you so much for your time, and look
Thanks,
forward
guys.
again to connect to you again. And thank you so much, guys.
Sure.
Guys have a nice evening, a nice day, wherever you're logging in from. Stay safe. Take care. Bye.